As it had already been said in different presentations today, religious freedom is a right whose practice integrates different aspects as much on the collective level as on the personal level. This right does not have quite the same meaning according to the point of view of liberal democracies or in the Church's point of view. More than 3 centuries ago, modern democracies already were theorizing a view that was at times philosophical, Locke, Bayle, Voltaire, and especially legal, concerning religious freedom. How could we not think of Article 1 of the Bill of Rights? Congress shall, I quote, make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Even closer to us in time, this right is affirmed clearly in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, approved by the United Nations. I quote, this right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom, either alone or in community with others, and in public or private, to manifest his religion of belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. End of quotation. The text Dignitatis humanae, proposed by the Church only half century ago, formalized what she always had defended, the right of conscience seen as a sanctuary that always must be respected. In this sense, the Church had never forged a division between interiority and exteriority, or between conscience and right, as certain authors have been able to observe. The human dignity of the person demands that his freedom to adhere or not to a determined faith be recognized, as well as his freedom of worship, his freedom to act in the name of his religious and moral convictions, the right to pastoral services, and the exercise of conscientious objection founded upon faith. When Dignitatis Humanae was written, we found ourselves within a social and cultural context that was decipherable easily enough. Two worldviews clashed with one another, one being collectivist present within the countries of the communist bloc, and the other view that willingly would define itself as that of the free world. It's not a matter of dispute that this dual vision covered a tangible reality. It was possible to practice faith and to teach in religious matters and within the moral realm in all of the countries that formed the free world. The latter readily found itself in the example offered by the New World. How can we not remember the admirative statement articulated by Pope Benedict XVI on April 15 in 2008 on board in a plane that was transporting him to the United States? Responding to a question that had been formulated by journalists in Italian, Pope Benedict stated the following: what I find fascinating in the United States is that it began with a positive concept of secularity, because these new people was composed of communities and individuals who had fled from the state church and wanted to have a secular state that would give access and opportunities to all denominations, to all forms of religious practice. The state itself had to be secular, precisely out of love for religion in its authenticity, which can only believe freely. This seems to me to be a fundamental and positive model worthy of being borne in mind in Europe. End of quotation. It is not for me to say if the Pope would say the same words concerning the same country today, 5 years later. What I do have the freedom to state clearly is that during the course of the past 5 years, something has changed within all the regions or the countries that we represent here. I would like to return to the expression liberal culture first, that is used in the title of this presentation. There are two possible meanings for this term. The first refers to a social organization that would leave alone the great economic balances of a country organized naturally according to the laws of supply and demand and free exchanges, favoring as much as possible the free enterprise of its citizens. It is difficult to assess whether or not this kind of society really continues to exist. The question is legitimate. If one considers the ever-increasing standards imposed by international, governmental, and non-governmental organizations. But the second meaning of the expression liberal culture refers to the moral liberalism involving a view of absolutized freedom. A liberal culture here refers to a permissive society where partial or subjective values are exalted, among which, in addition to the notion of freedom without limits, there is a pursuit of well-being in the hedonistic sense of the term, the elimination of moral norms, with a strict separation between freedom and nature. This term, nature, being for that matter increasingly ignored and discredited. Our reflection thus is written within the context of a liberal culture along the lines of the second description that we have just defined. It is characterized by a real ethical relativism, an expression dear to Pope Benedict XVI, and for which we could propose the following definition. Relativism is the intentional or unintentional neglect of the natural moral law. On October 5, 2007, in an address to the members of the International Theological Commission, the Pope stated the following: when the fundamental requirements of human dignity, of human life, of the family institution, of a fair social order, in other words, basic human rights, are at stake, no law devised by human being can subvert the law that the Creator has engraved on the human heart without the indispensable foundation of society itself being dramatically affected. End of quotation. When the successor to Peter refers to the democratic order, he does not intend to give a lesson in political science. He intends to underscore the fact that a human society organizing itself in a political community needs to respect its foundations, namely the natural moral law, without which the honor owed to the dignity of the human person and to institutions that structure social life tend to disappear. Marriage, family, moral education, and so on. It is appropriate then to specify the condition for the existence of a political community in a proper sense of the term, the polis. This will permit us afterwards to see what is meant by the disregard for these conditions in a morally liberal downward spiral. The response to the question, is religious freedom possible in a liberal culture, will become more apparent. So the requirement of political community, the debt that all democratic societies have towards Greek thought, most especially to Plato and Aristotle, must be acknowledged. We owe to the latter this fundamental idea that the city, the polis, is the end in which all communities find their fulfillment and are able to better themselves. We owe to Aristotle as well the assertion that a genuine political community is organized according to the principle of justice. Justice is a virtue that permits an harmonious relationship between the individual and the political dimension. It thus does not involve, as a large number of political officials and commentators pretend to believe, responding to individual demands emanating from this or that lobby or vocal minority. For Aristotle, the city is the result of a natural process that starts for the basic human need to interact with others in order to realize the supreme good of the community. A good of the community that exists in itself, one that cannot be the sum total of its citizens' singular aspirations, but which has a consistency that only the virtue of justice can give. The common good is today, as a subject, increasingly unknown. One of the last philosophers to have done so is the French Jacques Maritain, whom it pleases me to acknowledge in this place, could only have developed and taught his thought in the United States after the politically correct institutions of his own country, sorry for that, already had judged incorrect any social thought that found its inspiration in gospel teaching. It has become necessary to consider what makes man a being in relation. No? The desire to communicate exists within each person to develop relationship with others in different ways, which can range from a simple external relationship to the most intimate communion. It conforms to the need for every spiritual creature to have interpersonal relationship. An interpersonal relationship supposes that each party acts humanly as a person and therefore, in turn, is treated as a person. This approach excludes any objectification or manipulation of the other person. It's impossible to cover here the innumerable contribution of personalistic thought in this regard. How could you not mention the distinction that Gabriel Marcel made between problem and mystery? A problem is resolved, but one cannot resolve the mystery. It is entered into with respect. According to Marcel, mystery designates all that be referenced to the human person. For his part, in Love and Responsibility, Karol Wojtyła described the elements that define a being in relation: the citizen, member of a public community, the parent, member of the familial community, and the believer, member of a religious community. Men are members of several communities on one time. To belong to a community of interest or a destiny is only the first degree of relationship. There is a shift toward a more intimate reality, the moment that allows us to recognize the other person as our neighbor. How could we not mention, in contrast, the response that Cain gave to God when God questioned him about his brother Abel? Am I my brother's keeper? Recognizing our neighbor in the other is to take upon ourselves a responsibility towards him. Emmanuel Levinas called this sentiment responsibility for others. It is known that this author expressed the person of the other by his face, which is defined as the expressive in the other, that which orders me to serve him. The uniqueness of the person cannot be expressed any better. The first implication of the foregoing is that persons are not interchangeable, and they elude all reductivist application, especially those that classify them into a minority. Yes, Cain, you were responsible for your brother. He was your neighbor. What is a neighbor? It is he to whom we feel to be close and whom we recognize as being close to us. It concerns the recognition of familiarity, of a community of nature, and the acknowledgement of the other as a wealth given to us. Friendship and love are a specific and more intense participation in the humanity of a person, more intense because it engaged interiority. Love is the presence of the beloved in the one who loves, the ancient of old would say. It appertains to the same essence of love that it be an interpersonal and not unilateral relationship. Only an individualistic view of love, according to which the presence of a personal feeling would guarantee authenticity in itself, forgets the essential character of reciprocity and the gratuity of a double gift that is made to the other by each party in the relationship. This relationship generates a common good in two ways, friendship and love. All friendship, love, amor benevolentiae, implies alterity, otherness, which often is the driving force of love and not an obstacle to its development. Lavelle observed that there is only true love than where, instead of suffering from the difference between the other and me, it is the same difference that gives me joy. On the basis of this anthropology that is barely outlined here, it is understood that a political community, in the best sense of the term, describes a society that recognizes and acknowledges the alterity within it. The city is not the abolition of the communities. It respects them while giving them the means to exist and to find their fulfillment. It protects the good of all because it is a depository for it. It does not create an imaginary, ideal, or ideological common good. The common good precedes the responsibility of politicians who do not have the mandate to do or undo as they wish that which, on the contrary, they are supposed to serve and protect. The city does not abolish communities because if it were to do so, it inevitably would be transformed into a concentration camp-like universe worthy of an Orwellian world. To do away with communities would mean destroying social alterity. Men would become citizens without personality, interchangeable among themselves, no longer being able to distinguish between children and parents, one another only consider as neutral citizens. In such a society, and we saw that, for instance, a child could attack his parents in the name of justice. At an extreme, members of the same family even could be separated by violence, as happened, for instance, in Cambodia 20 years ago for millions of individuals. When distinctions are abolished between citizens, rights necessarily enter into conflict and fundamental rights are destroyed. Contemporary societies are not only governed by leaders bearing a legitimate authority that allows them to carry out the duties of government or administration. Political responsibility now must assimilate and integrate the existence of another power, that of the press in all of its form, written and oral, a power that is part of what is now called a major-centered culture. It seems to me that focus is not given often to the unprecedented fact that the capacity of the media has been magnified in recent years by the ability to communicate in real time, such that every limit of time and space has been eliminated. To communicate information live in a manner destined to reach a large number of persons simultaneously is to lose the minimum time necessary for the analysis and interpretation of related events. That could be as well the expression of an unlimited power that imposes new criteria for judgment, new standards of living, and ultimately new ways of thinking about the relationship between individual and community. This power is immense because communication does not remain content with transmitting ideas or arguments, but also communicates images whose force of impact is now able to shape crowds according to the latest immoral trends. This specific characteristic of the media-centered culture, as we are able to see expressed today, should be introduced within our definition of a liberal society today. The second element that seems to me to characterize liberal society is individualism that consists in limiting a person's own cultural and relational horizon to his own personal ideas, to his tastes and desires, without being able to bring into this horizon any consideration of another's freedom, dignity, or personal value. The individual isolated within his increasingly virtual universe, even more removed from the concrete experience of relationship with another, is not a threat to the political power who then can, with cynicism, manipulate him with ease. Until only some years ago, the products proposed were especially of a material kind. 30 years ago, one spoke of a consumer society or consumer goods. Today, what seems decisive to me is the capacity of the liberal culture to propose immaterial goods. Virtual universe without seemingly any link to concrete life, the illusion of feelings, online sexuality, and finally, ideological conditioning at the moral and social levels. We must remain conscious that the problem posed by the utilization of unprecedented and infinite means placed at the service of new ideologies has not yet found a credible solution. I would like to give witness here to what I personally have observed during the course of these past years. I will take as my example the diffusion of gender theory across the different continents. For a little less than 10 years, at the Council for the Family, but also at the John Paul II Institute, we have been able to work on this question well before the question entered into public debate, for instance, in my country, 2 years ago, concerning the intent behind the question of school biology curricula that put forward gender theology as a scientific certainty. The parents of these students reacted, and the question was debated in a French parliament. The problems that we have mentioned here called some years ago for treating the anthropological and ethical aspect of the problem, something that remains indispensable today, to do in any case even today. I have chosen simply to tell you how many of these problems mentioned have worsened over the past 3 or 4 years in an accelerated process, difficult to measure at the time. During the course of the 13th General Assembly of the Synod of Bishops on the new evangelization last October, everyone noted that more than 100 bishops had mentioned the essential question of the familial institution during their presentations. All arrived at the conclusion that there will be no new evangelization at all without strong pastoral action towards families. In a final message of October 26, one reads, "Ever since the first evangelization, the transmission of faith from one generation to the next found a natural home in a family. A new evangelization is unthinkable without acknowledging a specific responsibility to proclaim the gospel to families and to sustain them in their task of education." A comment here is necessary. If the family cell explodes, the natural place for faith to be transmitted and lived disappears. On the occasion of his Christmas wishes to the Roman Curia last December, the Pope added, I quote, "Man's refusal to make any commitment, which is becoming increasingly widespread as a result of a false understanding of freedom and self-realization, means the situation has become extremely complex and troubling insofar as it gives this transgression legal consistency, making this issue an absolute novelty. The accelerated character of this novelty, giving legal recognition to a homosexual union, leads us to ask if there is a deliberate drive crossing cultures and nations to establish a new morality, actually called a morality of consensus, and a new organization of social life. For the past 3 years, I've been able to go to Argentina on 2 occasions. The first time, I met with members of the Argentinian parliament, deputies and senators, who led me to observe that government's use of an argument seemingly impossible to contradict, the argument of equality, to justify the initiative of a completely revolutionary law in Latin America. The expression that was used by the Argentinian government was matrimonio igualitario, or egalitarian matrimony. These parliamentarians had understood perfectly well that the principle of equality is practically infallible, insofar as it provides legal grounds for marginalizing opponents of the law. After this first trip, I was able to explain to different bishops from my country, together with family association during their visit to Rome, that after a delay of some months, the argument of equality would certainly be used in several European countries, beginning with France. I even tried with them to imagine how this concept would be translated into my language. I have to admit that at the time I had not imagined the expression that became a true slogan in France over the course of mere weeks. Mariage pour tous, marriage for all. An expression far more alluring than the original Spanish. Honestly. As you doubtlessly know, this bill was passed last week by the National Assembly in spite of the extraordinary demonstration of more than 1 million people last January the 13th. 300,000 for the police, but for the organizer, 1,300,000. Permit me to remark to you that during the same week, the same project happened coincidentally to be passed by the British Parliament, by way of a proposal by the Conservative government. And what is there to say of the threat of that country's Prime Minister addressed to African countries to do away with all economic aid if their government officials were not to take steps to ensure homosexual persons the same rights as others regarding not only external behavior, but public behavior, but also the ability to contract a same-sex marriage. Let us now turn to a new visit, if you want, to Argentina. 3 months ago, in the city of San Luis, more than 3,000 people, couples and family, Christian family, had gathered together. Several dozen among them got my attention concerning the fact that the law, voted upon 2 years earlier, had not only divided the Argentinian citizens, but it had rendered fragile the unity at the heart of their families. Why? Not because there was a gay in every family willing to get married, but everyone was saying that it had become impossible to speak about this issue in the family as the children and adolescents were being subjected to incessant propaganda in their school, college, and universities. If you have the opportunity, as I have had, to go to Buenos Aires, you will be welcomed by huge advertisements on the walls of the city containing such statements to present the country Argentina an egalitarian country, or even more, Argentina an inclusive country. I could speak of the situation in Malta. I could speak also of Poland and Ireland, and I have to jump because of the time. But I could give you multiple additional examples I've seen in the last years. The most recent concerned the situation in the Philippines, where, in spite of a heroic resistance by their bishops, a reproductive health bill was just imposed. The law provides not only for the free distribution of condoms to rural population at village medical centers, but it includes teachings on sexual education for children starting from the age of 10. What is significant here is that there is a clause prohibiting these children from bringing home said pedagogical material, because it's said like that. Their parents might not be in agreement with the contents. The Filipino bishops formulated their own version of the culture of death, which is extraordinarily general, no? Death is D like divorce, E like euthanasia, A like abortion, T like total population control, H like homosexual union. That's it. Really good. You understand what I mean, no? The way. I hope that these examples had convinced you that we are facing a radical change of civilization. It's not for me to give an apocalyptic interpretation of the situation, but rather a quotation from the Minister of Justice of my country. Other measures may appear more anecdotal, but are also extremely serious. I will mention only the declared willingness to receive children into nursery schools starting at the age of 2 in order, and this time I'm quoting the other woman, another minister, the minister of the family, to wrest from them every possible social, philosophical, familial, and religious determinism. End of quotation. This only weeks ago. So the moment has come for me to draw conclusions from this reflection and facts that I have sought to place before you. You here have noted, up to this moment, I have not once used the term of laicite, secularism, even though it falls precisely at the heart of our debate. In my country, there is a philosophical tradition concerning rights that stems from the age of the Enlightenment, from the French Revolution, and finally from the separation of the church and state, laws of 1905. In the 18th century, Voltaire, the emblematic apostle of tolerance, following Locke, advocated the recognition of religious freedom for all religions except for one among them, the Catholic religion. In 1793, the rights of clergy found their end, as it is well known, under the blade of the guillotine. In the case of the French Revolution, what was done in that year, 1793, was totally contrary to what had been professed 4 years earlier in Article 10 of France's Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. No one shall be disturbed on account of his opinion, even a religious one, provided their manifestation does not disrupt the public order as established by law. End of quotation. As regards the 1905 laws, they gave rise to the expulsion of religious communities and the expropriation of their goods. That laicite and tolerance. This philosophical and political tradition led to the definition of a concept, laïcité à la française, French-style secularism. It was until several years ago an unicum, or if you prefer, a tragic privilege. This view, as several examples I have barely conveyed to you have demonstrated, professes theoretically a strict separation between church and state, not in the sense of the healthy autonomy within their spheres of influence, a perspective that the church has affirmed numerous times, making its own the expression positive secularism, but in exclusion of the church from public debate. I was here in the past on occasion here in Washington in 2007 to show how a society that affirms itself to be ideologically tolerant in reality is incapable of accepting assertion within it that contradict its ideology. In fact, a liberal society, in the ideological sense of the term, excludes any reflection concerning personal ethical question. In reality, it always places itself above substantive debates and disqualifies them. This liberal culture, this tolerant society, imposes one thought, in this sense, is totalitarian. Most logically, it cannot even accept conscientious objection, as recent debates in the French Parliament have illustrated, concerning the question of the marriage for all. Several civil officers of the state, in fact, asked to be exempted for personal reason of conscience from celebrating marriage, same-sex marriage. And this was not accepted. In light of what has been said concerning the nature of an authentic political community, to know if it's capable of recognizing alterities, we are allowed to affirm that a liberal culture does not have this capacity. It is so weak on its foundations that it feels any rigorously founded argument to be a threat. Liberal culture is not able to measure what other contribution could be made other than those that pander to his own weak thought. In this sense, it contributes to the degradation of the social fabric. Alexis de Tocqueville entitled a chapter of his great work, Democracy in America, in this way. Title of a chapter. From religion considered as a political institution, how powerfully it serves the maintenance of the democracy republic among the Americans. End of title. No? It can only indulge the curiosity, there to read such a paragraph as this one. It's what I did. Because I was curious to find arguments. So it has been around 50 years since Ireland began to pour a Catholic population into the heart of the United States. As the author is writing his work in 1835, the first volume, the first part, so he refers to the years 1760, 770. He adds, for his part, American Catholicism makes converts. One encounters in the Union today more than 1 million Christians who profess the truth of a Roman church. These Catholics, said Tocqueville, display great fidelity to the practices at that time, to the practices of the religion, and are full of fervor and zeal in their belief. However, they form the most republican and most democratic class within the United States. Tocqueville, end of quotation. Tocqueville outlines some hidden reason that I will let you, for your curiosity, discover on your own from reading this major work. Tocqueville could not imagine any better confirmation of his work than the fruitfulness 1 century later of the contribution made to the social life on this country by a son of Ireland like Michael McGivney. Few minds are now able of making out what Tocqueville clearly had identified, the advantage that a free society can derive from the contribution of a religion within it. The majority of authors believe, or pretend to believe, that there is such a thing as a democratic neutrality, an expression coined by one of these authors, Marcel Gauchet, postmodernist sociology. And the latter characterizes with delight modernity's movement by the expression departure from religion. Each religion, says, recognizes the freedom of others, but does not affirm lest for its account a style of conviction, excluding the consideration that other convictions are possible. It seems to me that we find here the interpretative key, permitting to us to understand what models postmodern thought, the pretension of universality in religions, teaching in faith or morals. We understand that the only religion that has given thought in a deepened manner to universality is the Christian religion, and among the different Christian confessions, if I may say, rightly Catholic thought. It would be interesting to list all facets of the Catholic profession of faith that come into play in this direction, the creation of all men in Christ in the image and likeness of God, the universality of salvation. God desires that all men be saved, the universality of the vocation to holiness, the mission that should reach to the ends of the earth, and so on. One could write a Christian encyclopedia, it could be a doctorate here, no? Starting from the idea of universality in a Christian meaning. The question of knowing if religious freedom is possible in a liberal culture could now be formulated in this way. Is Christian freedom possible in a liberal culture? My conviction is that a religion accommodating the ethical relativism proper to liberalism has no need to worry. The weak consensus always will reserve for it a modest but comfortable place, as long as it does not disturb the mandate of a moral unanimity. Who to anyone who meddles with distinguishing good from evil and teaching what distinguishes them? If we think of all those who have given tribute to Christian freedom by their lives, the martyrs, we understand that there no longer was a place for them within human society each time it asserted the establishment of political unanimity in thought and worship. Whoever refused to sacrifice to the gods of the empire had to be sacrificed to the best or decapitated. You signed your death warrant, Cyprian, when you wrote, "I am a Christian and bishop. I do not know any other God except the one true God who created heaven and earth, the sea and all that is contained therein." And you, Thomas More, you signed yours when you dared not only to refer to the natural law, when contesting the validity of the law of royal succession, but yet to the right of your conscience to remain faithful to the successor of Peter. The martyrs were excluded from the earthly city that did not support their difference, the unique character of their testimony of holiness. They incarnated a living reproach to societies that claimed to develop themselves without God. I do not know if it's right to say that in an ideologically consensual society there is no place for witnesses of the faith, but such witnesses of the faith know what awaits them. We know that the ideal society is not of this world, in spite of the dreams of Plato. But returning to St. Augustine, whom Benedict XVI always has found to be the inspiration for and father of a healthy secularism, an open laicity. No? This ideal society is a communion of saints, based on both the diversity of unique individuals and recognized alterities. The communion of saints, proper to the city of God, is a universe where each person becomes eternally himself on the grounds that he received the wealth of others at the same moment where, freely, he gives himself to them. Thank you for your attention.